Up next, we try to make sense of the rise in what looked like apologist attitudes and conversations about Hitler and the Nazis we've seen recently coming from figures on the political right. All right, Tunde, our next topic today. We've seen recently, just in whether it be podcasts or in social media, a lot of what looks like apologists and kind of an affinity and almost standing for like Hitler or the Nazis and what they did or didn't do and so forth, coming from figures on the political right. What do you make of this kind of what looks like an affinity almost, or kind of just this standing, like, hey, we got to stand up for these guys and they're misunderstood, all this other stuff. What do you make of what we're seeing here?
I don't know. It would be laughable if it wasn't people in actual positions of power and influence. So I would say, because I thought that, that was one of the few things that, the world and our kind of current culture, especially in the United States, had settled on, that Nazis were bad. Stalin was bad. The Soviet Union got beat by us through the second half of the 20th century by us being better than them. And that
they were murdering tens of millions of people.
Yeah, and Mao wasn't good. Same thing, murdering tens of millions of people. And also that our system beat their system. I think that's the important thing. Like that kind of, because at first I was thinking about a joke about trying to be sympathetic to the Jewish community, that they just can't escape anti-Semitism because of your allusion to Nazis and to Hitler. But I'm reminded of the first man, Mr. Musk, having reposted something in the last week, and I'll read it here. The quote is, "Stalin, Mao, and Hitler didn't murder millions of people. Their public sector workers did." And that's what I'm saying, James. I don't know. I don't know why this man feels the need to, and that's why it's not just anti-Semitism, even though I do think he's an anti-Semite. He's shown that enough. But by bringing in Stalin and Mao, it's something about that, for some reason, these guys like him, J.D. Vance, and others, they seem to want this kind of control. They seem to opine for Stalin, Mao, and Hitler, really the type of control they had on their societies. This kind of this dominating everybody. Everybody's got to have the imprint of those leaders. And they seem to not like the kind of society that we have had in the United States that beat those other societies in the 20th century, which is an open, pluralistic society.
And that's really stuck out to me. We're all moving. We're trying to do this all together, as opposed to one person saying it's my show. So you're saying, so you actually, you were misleading when you said you don't know. What you're saying is that it's an admiration thing going on.
I think so.
I don't know. Like what you're suggesting. Yeah, like think there's an admiration.
So good point. I guess I say I don't know, and maybe even James, that's maybe even me trying to defend still whatever I feel of normalcy, because you're right. Maybe I do know. Maybe it is this obvious.
That's what you think. That's what I'm saying. Like what you explained there with admiration.
Here's what I realized, James. This is the interesting thing. The Orwellian thing of the party's last instruction was not to believe, your lying eyes type of thing.
Yeah.
We're actually there, because think about it. The first man did 2 Sieg Heils on inauguration night. We were told by everybody, including the Anti-Defamation League, that immediately after, that we didn't see what we saw. We saw an awkward gesture.
Yeah.
And since then, others have copied it, including Steve Bannon, all that. Then that got me thinking, James, this is psychological warfare by this group on us has been going on for a long time, because I thought about Charlottesville in 2017. We saw a bunch of young men with tiki torches that appear to look like Kristallnacht in the U.S. saying Jews will not replace us. And we were again told by our leadership at the time that we didn't see that. Don't think that you saw what you saw. So you're right, James. There's something going on here. Maybe I'm still trying to be nice and trying to be Mr. Both Sides and all that when I say I don't know. And thanks for correcting me. I guess I do know. These guys do admire 20th century, mid-20th century authoritarians. And for some reason, and it's kind of like, James, and sorry for keep going, but just to finish here, because I wouldn't mind your thought. We've done shows and discussion about the Confederacy, and you're very good at always bringing up people make a choice. they can choose to support the Union or the Confederacy. And in one of our shows, we
it's
asked
who they relate to.
and if you think about it, we made the comment, the Confederacy, first of all, they were very clear about what they were doing. They said it in writing. And they lasted 4 years and they lost.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about the same thing. The Nazis lasted 12 years. Stalin's Russia lasted about 70 years.
Well,
and Mao lasted about 40 years. And they all lost. And these people want to go to that side versus the side that won, which is us. I was curious.
Because what this actually reminds me of is this kind of apologist attitude. It reminds me of the lost cause. And this idea, now to your point, the point I've made with that is that when we were having all the discussions about the Confederate monuments and and all that kind of stuff, what is revealing to me, and that is something I always take note of, is for the United States, for someone to look back and say, okay, the Confederacy, that's who I identify with. Like, that's just very interesting to me, because they weren't very long lasted, and the only thing they really stood for was white supremacy and keeping slavery in place. Like, that's what they stood for. And so when you look at you could alternatively, if you're an American, you can say, hey, I identify with the Union. They stood for the Constitution, they won, all this other stuff. Or you could say, hey, I like the guys who rebelled against the Union and who took a L, and but they were and if you were saying, oh well, those guys were tougher, like, no, that's not at all. You could just as easily look at Stonewall Jackson and be like, yeah, that was a cool dude. Or you could look at Ulysses Grant, or you could look at John Brown, and say, oh yeah. So it's always this choice that people are making as far as what emotionally that resonates with them. And so it was always interesting to me that so many people, even in this day and age, they would emotionally say what emotionally resonated with them was the Confederacy. Like, they didn't win. They stood for, white supremacy and slavery, and so it's just like, okay, so what's going on there? Do you like them because they didn't win? Or did you like them because of the other thing? But either way,
yeah.
In this case, the lost cause, part of what the lost cause was, and that was not some accident in history. It was an effort because of this affinity. That now, at least then, people were closer to it. Like, the Daughters of the Confederacy, a lot of them were related to people in the Confederacy, so you can understand an affinity there. But what they did, it was like, hey, we want to recast what happened. We want to make it so that people in the future don't remember the Confederacy as only standing for white supremacy, as written by Alexander Stephens, the member of the cabinet of the Confederacy, and and all the leaders basically of the Confederacy. We don't want them to be remembered for those things. We want to create a new history, what these people can be remembered for. And it's been successful in many respects, because you start having people talk about, oh, well, the Civil War wasn't about slavery and all that. So this lost cause was a concerted effort made after the fact to recast the history so that future generations, at minimum, would be arguing about it. It wouldn't be some clear fact of history. What we're seeing now, I think, with historians going on Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan talking about, oh, well, Winston Churchill's the villain in World War II and all that. It's an effort to rewrite the history so that people now and people in the future will not see this clear delineation between the murderers who lost and the liberators who came in and kicked their butt. And so more people can emotionally identify with the murderers who lost. And that's really what's happening. And these people, emotionally, what resonates with them is the murderers who lost.
Yeah, what's fascinating is it works. I mean, we have people like Kanye West, who's a Black American, saying Hitler's cool. And I get it that he's a little bit off his rocker. But what it does is it gives a permission slip for others who may not be that much off their rocker, but also may be very uneducated, about history and all that.
I see what you're saying, though. Like, it gives more. It allows people who actually the idea of the oppression and the murdering resonates with them, and the exertion of power, like you were talking about. Like, hey, I want to be a dictator, so I admire other dictators, and it gives them permission to kind of do it out loud. More so, the more consensus it appears there is, the more people that are behind it.
And also, what it does is, just like the Lost Cause did, it diminishes the importance of the topic in history, and also diminishes the suffering of the victims. You know what I mean? So, because if you make the Holocaust an unserious thing, then people aren't really thinking about the fact that children screaming children into ovens, and stuff like that, and just killed people, and not only that. It's not just the killing of people, it's the confiscation of property. That's why, to me, the Holocaust and the way that Jews were treated, especially in Eastern Europe, late 1800s or early 1900s, was very similar to the way Black Americans were treated after Reconstruction, which was a lot of theft, a lot of theft of land, property, and other people got wealthy. And most people don't want to admit to their children that they live in a nice house because they took it from someone else. So what they do is they reinvent history and say, well, those people were bad people and they were stupid or they were lazy or whatever, right? And so and that's why it's just curious to me that I thought a lot of this was solved culturally and that we were in agreement as a culture that those things were bad in the 20th century and that the United States won. We were the shining city of the hill.
Correct with that. We were in agreement, but the people who were the fringe people now are making a push. And the reason it's notable is because
they're now in power. They're no longer fringe.
Well, we get to see it in real time. Like we've read about this, we've heard about this. Like you remember the American generals who came in and, like when they came into Germany when they were winning the war and everything like that, they made a conscious decision that they wanted to document this stuff because they were like, people are not going to believe this.
You're right.
If we don't document this stuff. People aren't going to believe it. And then they also know that impulse in human history that some people are going to come around and be like, no, it wasn't like that or anything like that. They will try to be apologists for it. So the people, and it's really a tell, though. It really does tell because, again, most people don't walk around desiring to identify with people who lose. So when you have people that are apologists for a lot of these people, the Nazis or whatever, a lot of times the reason isn't because they like them because they lost. The reason is because they like them because of what they stood for. And that's a tell about that person. And so that's what we're seeing. And we're seeing those people now make a live and in color effort to rewrite the history to bring more people over to them who may either have that emotional pull or at least to try to make it even to where you can pick one or the other without feeling social repercussions, which, like you said previously, because society had decided a way that it felt on it, you would feel social repercussions on choosing the side of the murderers who lost.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating because maybe this does speak more to the idea of living memory, right? We just have enough people, unfortunately, who have passed away that were alive during that time. And, you make a good point. I'm going to go back to what you said about some of the modern or today's media influencers and I would say entertainment media types like Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan recently had a gentleman who Tucker Carlson said was one of the great historians in America right now. And I'll read
you're
real
most
quick.
Honest or something like that.
Yeah.
Which is just like they call that dude honest.
Yeah, I don't even want to name the guy because I don't want to give him the people can go figure out who it is if they watch one of Rogan's shows. But Rogan asked him, when did Hitler start going after the Jews? Good, I guess, regular question. And the guy's answer is, quote, his anti-Semitism is what allowed him to love the German people. I mean, that is one of the most offensive things you could say, right?
I mean, it's also stupid, but
it's just I mean, these arguments, like you said, this is the same guy that said that Winston Churchill was the aggressor. But James, think about what we're seeing. It's the same trying to rewrite history of 3 years ago.
Yeah,
we have the same type of people saying that now it was Ukraine that was the aggressor against Russia.
Yeah,
it's the same type of thing about putting so much crap out there and like you said, trying to muddy the waters enough for people emotionally and historically so that they might just give up and say, oh, okay, I don't know who's good or who's not, and just let them do what they want. And so, but here's what I'll say, James, this is why I'm personally offended by a lot of this stuff, because I feel like we're not that old. I just turned 47. I'm born in 1978. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. I can vividly remember right now, my grandma used to be in a retirement home in Tacoma Park, right outside of D.C., called Tacoma Towers. That's how much I accurately remember it. And she would play bridge every day with her friends. And I would come home from elementary school and my mom would be at work. So I go to my grandma's apartment thing and hang out with her. And two of her friends every day that had played bridge had tattoos on their arm from concentration camps that they survived. And like, that's what I'm saying. Like when you see tattoos on an old lady who's maybe at that time she was 70 years old, and you see her wrinkless skin and you see the way the numbers were done, very, like someone was in a rush. It's hard to say that never happened or that was a hoax or something like that. And I think that you think about the suffering of people, like we go back to whether it's the Civil War, whether it's the people getting bombed in Ukraine unfairly, or whether it was people in World War II dying from Stalin starving 20 million people. That's to me why it's just sad. I won't even say it's offensive. I'll say it's sad, like you say, that this many people now think it's okay to revisit this part of history with fondness for those people. It's just
Well, it's a
and I just
building
don't
effort.
understand it.
It's a conscious effort though, and that's like I
Yeah,
wanted to ask
exactly. I
you.
don't understand it. And it's a conscious effort to reject the facts. That's
Yeah.
really the bigger
Well, but
thing.
that's remember with all these kind of conflicts, whether it be like hot wars or even just skirmishes and so forth. There's the battle that actually happens with the bullets and stuff, but then there's also the battle of information. And whose story is going to be remembered and put forth. And so just because the war ended and the battle for information was decisively won at one point, that doesn't mean that the war is not going to restart again necessarily, but the battle over the information and the perception can restart and has restarted. And this is like you said, with when Russia went into Ukraine, they started the battle for information right away as well. Like we're going to start shooting bullets and we're going to start trying to recast what's happening and say that they are the aggressor against us. So this stuff is kind of par for the course with it. And like we're in this situation where I'm really interested to see how this plays out because we're in a different world now. Now, uninformed people who don't follow things, they kind of go with the wind a lot of times. So that's not really the people I'm looking at, but the people who I'm interested to see how this type of effort plays in modern society are the people who are reasonably knowledgeable and consider themselves informed. Because one thing that's happening now, like the way people get information through social media, is that people aren't able to look at things in depth as easily because things aren't presented to them in any level of depth. If everything you get, if the news you get is in 15-second clips, 20-second clips, then you just aren't going to have a depth of understanding on things, one. And two, you probably won't have too much conviction on the things that you have because you don't have that much depth of understanding. So if you're learning about history in 15, 20-second clips, then it may be easier to sway you. I wonder if it may be easier to do this now, to rewrite history in many people's minds, particularly people who think that they're informed and think that they follow information, because they don't have their brains aren't even wired to get a depth of understanding. It has to be presented to them in 30 seconds, and they're going to weigh that based on what they know, and then that's going to be that. So I think that the people who think that truth becomes self-evident and self-reinforcing are in for a rude awakening, because the people who want to cover over truth are hard at work right now. And the people who want what actually happened to be known are kind of sitting back thinking they already won. Kind of like what you just said, like, oh, I thought we already finished this bat. I thought this was over. And it's like, no. Actually, while you thought it was over, the people who want to rewrite the history have been over here coming up with 15-second tweets or 15-second, TikToks, trying to convince a bunch of people that actually here's what really happened. You know what I'm saying? So I think
it's a good point,
if you
James,
want the real out, if you want the real out there, basically, you better get to work.
Well, and it's also that at least these people right now control the modes of information, which some studies have shown that it's actually changing how we digest things cognitively. That you're right. Maybe people aren't able to focus much longer, and it could really make a real change because, again, perception is reality. So reality and facts aren't reality, perception is. So people begin to perceive that, the totalitarian regimes of the middle 20th century were not that bad. Then we could have a new reality that we enter totalitarian
and you look
regimes
at some
again.
of the major platforms, and they're either owned or run by people who would sympathize with Hitler or Mao or stuff like that.
Yeah, it's just interesting, and I guess this is where we're at. Is we might have to go through that cycle again, where we do have authoritarian, dominated world, and we start all this fighting again and having world wars. Just for people over 2 or 3 generations to try and feel like, oh, this sucks, and let's do something different. I mean, it's
impossible
kind of
to
sobering
predict how it'll play out, but it definitely it creates, and I mean, I think acknowledging that it creates a different world, one, and then two, also just being cognizant of what and who you engage with, because again, truth is not self-executing. What's real is it can be. People perceive what's real, or what people understand what's real is to be based on their perceptions. And so this stuff is fluid. And who you engage with, who you support, it all matters in terms of the way the lessons that have been learned throughout history, whether those continue on or whether those, as you point out, have to be learned again.
Yeah. And I think that, the unfortunate part, let me say it that way, of us being further removed and people just being less educated about history. I'm thinking of someone like Kanye, like we mentioned. So here's a Black American who's saying that Hitler was good because it's the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Because he's such an anti-Semite, he probably just thinking of the Nazis in terms of they don't like Jews, I don't like Jews either, so Hitler was okay. But as you joked to me before, maybe he never got taught the story of Jesse Owens. The idea that the Nazis were sympathetic to people of African descent is an absolute joke. So that's my concern. And I think we've seen that even with unfortunately, some of my friends, like in the Jewish community, where they were disturbed enough over the last year and a half to believe that because of things like college campus protests and all that, that there was all this anti-Semitism just only on the left. And that's what we're talking about. Like, well, it seems like the American right has allowed a lot of Nazi sympathizing and all that to come into their tent too. And I think it's the same thing for some of my Jewish friends in the last year and a half, which is they were so focused on what, their perception of, hey, these people are against Israel and all that because of what's going on in Gaza, that they kind of took their eye off the other enemy, like the actual people who support Nazis. Yeah. And it's just, that's what I'm saying. Like the algorithms push us all into these emotional spaces where we have a Black American, supporting Hitler, or we have our Jewish friends saying you one side of the American
was Zeke High. Like that, dude, like you pointed out to me.
That's what I mean. Like that kind of aren't calling out the Zeke Heil from Mr. Musk the same way they might call out a college protester at Columbia. And that's all I'm saying is that it's got people kind of like, saying, this one isn't as bad as this one. It's like
who's the richest man in the world who controls information platforms and all this other stuff. Yeah, and I don't know if that's
it's
fear.
Also like,
well, I want to wrap this up, but I don't know if that's fear. I don't know if the Anti-Defamation League is afraid of Musk, and so therefore they wanted to try to give cover of him. I don't know what that is, but it definitely that they were so quick to come out and be like, it was like, yo, maybe you want to let this play out and see, but why are you so sure? Like, you're not in this guy's head, and it's not like he's never
said anything.
That would be questionable. But there's one thing I wanted before we close it up. There's one thing I want to mention is I don't think that people are less informed now. I think that's that we shouldn't, like, people are. But you go back 100 years, man, people didn't know what was going on in the world at all. For the most part, like masses of people. So what it is, though, is that the people who think they're informed. This goes to your Roger Ailes, piece, but people think that they're informed who aren't informed. And that's the biggest difference, because then they take their misconceptions and build an active life around that. If you go back 100 years to 150 years, somebody who wasn't informed didn't think that they had all the information. They didn't know what was going on in Washington, and they knew they didn't know what was going on in Washington, or in the Middle East, or in here or there. Now, what you have is a lot of people who are spoon-fed things in 15-second clips, and so they think they're informed about something, but that they're not. But they act on that belief that they are informed, and so therefore it becomes, and the quote I mentioned was just that people don't want to actually be informed; they just want to feel informed, which seems to be the quote of the 21st century.
The evil genius
define everything we see. But let's wrap this up, man. Is there anything else you want to
say this, James, and for the audience, it's a Dunning-Kruger culture now. And for the audience to look up that definition of Dunning-Kruger effect. I mean, that's really what we're at. Yeah. That this society is permeated with it now.
You're not knowledgeable enough of your own limitations, basically, to really have a good enough perspective. And that's a natural human phenomenon, to your point. Like you have this effect. So, but no, I think we can wrap this show up from there. It's definitely, though, interesting
you don't
times.
Keep talking, bro. This is
great.
Look
around. We're living through history, which, living through interesting history. Everybody lives through history, but we're living through some interesting history, a transition in ages and all this other stuff. So, but that comes with, what comes with that is a lot of uncertainty. So, that's what we get to live with and talk about, observe, and all that. So, but we appreciate everybody for joining us on this episode of Call Like I See It. Subscribe to the podcast, rate it, review it, tell us what you think. Send it to a friend. Until next time, I'm James Keys.
I'm Tunde Ogunlana.
All right, we'll talk soon.